Good evening, everyone. It's better to share my screen. I already shared my screen. I hope you are able to see the screen, right? And I'm going to open the project. Along with, we have to open the Git document because we are already preparing the Git documentation. GitHub.com, and so I will share this document to you. So we created a repository with the name of React documentation yesterday. So we discussed how we are going to install the React application. Yesterday we discussed what are the different kinds of components available and what is the concept of composition and how we are going to apply styles to the component. So how many components are there in React? Can anybody respond in the chat box? Tell me what are the different kinds of components available in React? Can anyone respond here? What are the different kinds of components available in React? So root component and mainly three, sir. So may I know what are those? Respond in the chat box. What are the different kinds of components available in React? Respond quickly. So as we discussed in earlier sessions, so we have two kinds of components available. So those are class components and functional components. So we have two kinds of components. Those are class components and functional components. For functional components, we have to use function, and for class components, we have to use class keyword. And we have to extend properties from the base class, that is React.constructor, React.component. And so whenever we are going to use the class component, we need to use the render method for returning a value, returning a statement. All right. So very similar to this, we have to use class keyword for representing a class component. we have to use class keyword. And in the function component, we can return a value directly by using the return statement. First of all, we have to represent the function component by using return function keyword. For implementing a functional component. So we have to use function keyword. And we can return a value directly. The performance is very high than compared to class component. Alright, so these are the differences between the class components and the function components. For class components, we have to use class keyword for representing it. And we have to use render method for returning a value or a statement. Very similar to this, when we are going to work with the function components, we have to use function keyword for implementing a function component. And we can return a value directly. It's better to maintain the statement. Not only value, sometimes we are able to return the statement also. So these are having high performance than compared to the class component. So this is the main differences between the class components and the function components. Okay, so let me open the Visual Studio Code. So we already implemented few kinds of styles by using style attribute as well as the style object also. So I'm going to open the project folder. The project folder is located in this documents, and we have project training. If we open this, and this is the project folder here. So we have various kinds of files in it. So app.css, index.js, and app.js. All right. So now I'm going to run this first. This application. For running this, we have to use npm start. I'm going to use npm start again. And press enter. So for running an application, we have to use npm start. Npm start is the command for running a server or running a project. So if you observe this is a class component. We used a class keyword and we used a render method for implementing a class component. We can't return a value directly from the class component. Very similar to this, when we are going to work with the function component, we just used a function parameter, or we can use the arrow function also, and we can return a statement directly. So this is the difference between these two, class component and the function component. And one more thing is that, so when we are going to implement the class component, we have to use component base class. So we have to acquire the properties from this base class, that is component. So the one more point here is, so we have to acquire the properties from the base class. From base class for implementing. Good. And in the function component, we already discussed. So here we implemented this. So not only a function keyword, we can use the arrow function or anonymous function also. So this is a function keyword, so we can use the arrow function also. So we know how to represent the arrow function. So we have to use arrow for representing that function or arrow keyword. Let me use the pipe symbol in between that. So we have to use function keyword as well as or we can use the arrow function. Alright, so these are the main differences between the class components and the functional components. So we can use nodemon. Yes, we can use nodemon, but yes, by using that we can run the project directly without refreshing the page. That is one of the important aspects. So nodemon, so when we're going to work with the Express or any kind of other Node.js frameworks, we can use the nodemon, but React by default is having. So when we are going to save any kind of data, after a few seconds that the functionality will be working out here. We are able to observe the output. We are able to observe the manipulations available. What are the manipulations we did in the project, so that will be available in the output without refreshing the page. We can able to understand. That means we need not to use any kind of nodemon here. Yes, okay. And here, so we created two components. Those are class component and function component. That's fine. And we applied styles also. For applying styles, we used style attribute, right? So we used style attribute. So let me implement that. Styling components. For styling components, we used the style attribute. So the example is, so we used an element. For example, we used a h2 element in last session. So in the h2 element, we used some kind of sample content, that is something like sample content. All right. So in that, we used a style attribute, and we have to maintain the property and the value by using double binding statement. And we have to implement the properties. Remember, when we are going to work with the two-word statement, something like background color, text to shadow, all the stuff, we have to use a single word without using any kind of hyphen. So let me use background color. So I'm going to use background color here. Very similar to this, we have to provide the value of it. So we can use any kind of value. So I'm going to use green. All right. So here we have to implement the style. So this is syntax for inline styles. So this is a JavaScript syntax. So I'm going to use JavaScript. All right. So all right. Now this is a comment. So I'm going to maintain a comment for better understanding. So here we are applying the inline styles. So very similar to this, we can apply styles by using object also. Styles, styling component using JavaScript object. Okay, so for that, what we have to do, we have to create an object. So we created an object by using var keyword, and we represented a variable with the name of style, where style equals to, and we used an object like style, and we represented the styles like entries in the object. So similarly, we have to use background color, and we applied the styles. So we used some kinds of property along with the values. And when we are going to work with multiple entries, so we have to use comma separated values. So we have to use comma for separation. And we used color. For representing color, we can provide same kind of scenario. We can use the value also. So here I'm going to use hash 000. 000 is nothing but the black color text. So this is how we are going to style the components. So we have two kinds of scenarios when we are going to work with a single document. But if you want to apply the styles from the other external files, we can create an a .css file, and we can implement the styles there, and we can call them by using class selector or ID selector. So this is the scenario we already discussed yesterday. So is that clear, everyone? Is that clear? Yes. So up to now, everything is clear. So what are the concepts we discussed? We just recap all the stuff. Yes, clear. Okay. So now let me open the Visual Studio Code here. So we have two components here, and if you want to implement an external component, how we are going to do that? So I'm going to create another component. So we have only nearly 4 JS files. In the 2 files are for testing, and 2 files are for implementing the programming, the project. So first one is index.js. This is the root file, but app.js is the root component. I'm going to create another component in the src folder. So let me click on this src and click on add new file. So here we are able to see the icon. By clicking on this, we can create a new file. So I'm going to create another component. So remember everyone, when we are going to create a component, that should be starts with a capital letter. I'm going to use header.js. Header.js. Alright, so I just used header.js. I just created a file with the name of header.js. Very similar to this, when we are going to work with the function components, we can use the arrow functions also. So I'm going to use let header equals to, and I'm going to use the arrow function. So we can return a value directly. So I just used the return statement, and here I'm going to implement the header part. Header So this is the header part, and I'm going to use a sample content in it. That is React train. All right, React train. I just used a React train. So let me save this. But when we are going to use this header part in various kinds of components, first of all, we have to export it. So we have to use export default, and we have to use header. So header is the file name here, HEADER. All right. So this is export default method, and we used header as well. Okay, now it's time to implement that in app.js component. So let me open the app.js component, and we have to get the data from header.js. So we have to use import statement here. I'm going to use import header. So we know where the file exists. So we have to use from, and we have to use dot and slash, and we have to use the file name. The file name is header. The file name is header. This is alias name, and this is the file name. But if you want to execute the code, so we can represent that in the division. So I'm going to use header here. Header is nothing but this is alias name. So I'm going to use self-closing tag. So because when we're going to use like this is a complex scenario. So this is, I used a header here. So we are getting this from the header.js file. And this header is the alias name. We are using this here. We save this and execute in the browser again. So here we are able to see that React training. So this is the React training. All right. So here we used a header and also used a division. So in the division we are able to see the header part. So if you remember everyone, I'm going to open the element section here, and from here I'm going to use the body section. Here we have a root element. In that we have the division, another division. If you observe this, we are having a division. In that we have another division. So this is a very complex scenario. Why we are using multiple divisions for representing the data? This is worst scenario to do that. So we have to eliminate number of divisions available. So we need not to use multiple divisions like this, right? So there is not necessary here. So we have to eliminate this kind of divisions for separation. But when we are going to work with the multi-line statement, we have to enclose all the statements in a single tag. Alright, so you need not to use any kind of division. Instead of that, we can use a react.fragment. React.fragment is the latest feature of React. By using this, we can avoid number of divisions. I'm going to use react.fragment here also. So now let me save this and execute in the browser. So just refresh. So we need not to refresh it again. We already executed it. So let me open the body part. So body part, and yes, we are able to see that element type is invalid, expected a string, function undefined, likely forgot to export your component. So where is that? So let me check it out in console statement. So import JSX component fragment must be Pascal case. Okay, so let me use the F as capital, that is React fragment. Okay, let me save this and execute in the browser. So now we are able to see this, and we're able to find an error also. It's better to refresh this. I'm going to refresh this, and now we're able to see the output. So let me open the element section, and here this is the division. This is the root component, root element. And if you observe this, we are not able to see any kind of divisions here. So we are completely avoiding the divisions. So we can avoid the divisions by using this react.fragment. So this is the importance of react.fragment. So let me document it. So documenting, yes, this one. So I'm going to use fragments. So first of all, we have to know what is composition. Okay, so we have to know what is a composition. Composition is nothing but we can the process of combining full components together. This is called the composition. So whether it may be a class component or it may be a function component, whatever it may be, we have to combine multiple components together. This process is called the composition. Alright, so now we just discussed the concept of React fragmentation. React fragment. So we have to use React fragments for avoiding the number of divisions. So we have to use React for avoiding number of divisions. Alright, so we need not to use multiple divisions. We can use the React fragment. So we already discussed the syntax here. What we have to do, we have to use React fragment. React.fragment. So in between these tags, we have to represent the data. So this is React fragment, and we have to use various components. So we used history element, and we used data from the header section. So this is all about the React fragment. And very similar to this, we used React fragment like this. So we need not to use React fragment again. We can use empty tags like this. So I just removed React fragment. So we can use the empty tags also like this. So let me open the output. Now we're able to see same kind of output. There is no change. and we're able to see that number of decisions are avoided. So this is how we're going to use React fragments. So not only this, we can use React.fragment also, as we discussed earlier. So or we can use this syntax. So these two are similar. These two are for avoiding the number of divisions in the component. Is that clear, everyone? Is that clear? Is it clear? Yes, yes, it's clear. Yes, it's clear. So you can find the documentation here. Yes, it's clear. So now I'm going to use the one of the most important concept, that is state. State in React. Actually, a state is nothing but for storing a values or storing data, we have to use states in React. So let me document it first. State in React. The concept of state provides a way to store the data in a component. So for storing that, we have to use state. So let me use that here. So first of all, when we are going to use state concept in React, we have to use the class component. So we know this is the class component, and here I'm going to use the state. So for implementing the state concept, we have to use constructor. That means we have to get information from the base class, that is component. So I'm going to use constructor, and we have to use super method also. So I'm going to use super method, and after that we have to use this dot equals to, and we can provide the state here. So I'm going to use state. So remember everyone, the state must be in object format. So I'm going to use name is Hanuman, and I'm going to use a role, that is full stack developer. Alright, so we just used full stack developer. So this is the state. We just stored an information here. So by using state, we can store information in the state. So most of the cases we are getting information from the server. So that is in the format of JSON. So that is in the format of JSON. When we are going to store the data in the state, we have to use like this. We have to use syntax like this. So if you want to display this information, that is this dot state, so you can use binding statement. In this binding statement, we can use this dot state dot, and we have different kinds of keys, right? So if you want to call the value, we have to use the keys. So I'm going to use name. So this dot name, and I'm going to use so working as a, and we have to represent the role. So that is this dot state dot role. So we just used this dot state dot name working as this dot state dot role. Alright, so let me save this and execute in the browser. Now we are able to see Hanuman working as a full stack developer. Hanuman working as a full stack developer. So this is how we are going to use the state concept in React. Similarly, if you want to change the data available in the state, we have to use callbacks. For example, here I'm going to use an event that is on mouse over. I'm going to use on mouse over. So we have to use over, and we have to call a function here. So if you want to call the function, we can use the this keyword. This dot change, and I'm going to use state values. So mouse over, on mouse over, this dot change state values. So I hope you might be understand the concept, right? So how we are going to implement the state, and here we are adding a new event. So is it clear, everyone? All of you are following, right? Yes. Clear. So I hope you created a state in your component, and here we are adding a new event. We're adding an event. So that is h2 on mouse over. This dot change state value. Change this dot change state values. Okay. So now I'm going to use this function that is change state value. So let me use the change state value in render method. So that is change state values. So this is a function. So that is the reason I used the function arrow function, and we have to use a return statement, right? So yes, we need not to use any kind of return statement, but we have to implement the functionality here. So I'm going to use this dot. So if you want to change the values of the state, we have to use this dot set state function. Set state is a function. So we have to use this, and we have to use the object like state. And here we have to use the keys which were represented in the state component as state. So I'm going to use name, and I'm going to use Rajesh as the value. So similarly, I'm going to use the role, and I'm going to use MERN developer. Means we have already values. Those are name, Hanuman, role, full stack developer. But here we used a change state values, and we used this dot set state method. By using this method, we can change the values of a state. So let me execute this in the browser. Yes, change state values is not defined. So because we implemented that in the render method directly, that is the reason we are not able to call this function. What we have to do, we have to represent it above the render method. So for example, here this is the state, right? So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to call this above the render method. So this is the change state values, and we used this dot set state method. So when we are going to work with the callbacks, the calls or the functions must be declared globally. So we have to represent that above the render method. So let me save this and execute in the browser. So just refresh. And if you observe this, we are able to see Hanuman working as a full stack developer. So when we are going to mouse over, then the data gets changed. So previously we have Hanuman working as a full stack developer. But when we are going to hover this, now we are able to observe the difference. That is Rajesh working as a MERN developer. There is a change, right? We are able to see the change here. Clear, everyone? Is that clear? Is that clear, everyone? Yes. So if you want me to show the code, I will show the code also. So I would like to show the code for a while. Okay, definitely I will share the code. What is the role of super? So when we are going to use the combination of constructor method as well as super keyword, that means we are acquiring the properties from the base class. So what are the return statements are there in the base class? Those return statements will be accessible in the component. So here we used constructor and super keyword. So we used this dot state. So that means this component will have a return statement. In that return statement, we have the state implementation. So when we are going to call the return statements from the base class, we have to use constructor along with a super keyword, a super method. Not only state, for the props also we have to use these two. Share me the code. Yeah, I will share the code in GitHub. So this is how we are going to represent the code, the state. This is the constructor. Oh, this is the code. And let me open how we're going to represent that. So if you want to display that information, so we have to display that in render method. So whatever it may be, when we're going to change that. So here this is how we're going to represent the data. So that is how we're going to display or represent the data in the state. And if you want to change the or manipulate the data of a state, manipulating data from a state. So now I'm going to use snippet. So here what we are doing here, so we just using the on-change event. Right. So let me save this and copy it here. All right. So and if you want to change that, so what we have to do, so we have to use callbacks, that is change state values. Like that we have to use callbacks. So this is the function, and we have to represent that above the render method. Whenever we are going to change the value, we have to use set state method. So we just use the set state method, and we have to pass the parameters as object here. Very similar to this. If you want to use mouse out effect, for example, here I'm going to use mouse out is also completed, and I'm going to use mouse out function. So this dot now on mouse out function, on mouse out. So what we have to do, we have to call another function, that is this dot initial values. I just used a function that is initial values, and here I'm going to use initial values. So that is initial values equals to, I'm going to use syntax like this. But remember everyone, when we are going to use this dot set state, so it's better to use a parameter. I'm going to use prev state. I just used prev state, and here I'm going to use this dot set state method. I just used this dot set state method, and in that I'm going to use prev state dot name So yes, it's not possible here. So prev state, yes, it's fine here. but this is not that much of good because this dot set state and prev state is also fine. Yes, yes, yes. This is, we need not use any kind of close symbol. So let me remove all the stuff again. So this is little bit of confusing, right? So equals to, and I'm going to use prev state. Here I'm using the arrow symbol, and this dot set state, and this is a object like style. So let me use prev state dot name, and we are not able to use the prev state here. So we are getting some kind of error. Everything is fine. Prev state. So we just used a callback that is prev state. That's fine. Everything is fine, right? So okay. First of all, let me use the key that is name. Name is the key here. I'm going to use. So whenever we are going to use like this, we have to get the state value. So we need not to get the values here, so we can implement it directly. I will show you how to use the prev state again. So yes, I just used name, and I'm going to use the previous values. Hanuman, yes. So we are not able to access the information. So yes, let me open. Where is that admit? So let me open the admit again. So what I say today, that entire project can share in Git. So when I'm practicing, then use reference type. So no, it's not possible to share entire code part, but I will share sample codes. So you have to practice based on the sample codes, that's it. So it's not possible to send entire code part, entire project. So let me open the Visual Studio Code again. Alright, so when we are going to mouse out, so we have to change the values of a state. And I'm going to use name, right? So name, and here I'm going to use the role, that is full stack developer again. So we are using the initial values again. So initially we represented the key value pair like this: name, Hanuman, and role, full stack developer. So again, we are using same kind of values here too. So let me save this and check in the browser again. So let me refresh. The site can't be reached. So we have to exit. So yes, okay. We have to execute the program again by using npm start. Npm start. We have to use npm start. Let me click enter. The project getting starting. It's getting started and the server is started now. Yes, we are getting some kind of noise. So this is one of the requests from colleagues. So just kindly confirm whether my voice is audible or not properly. So just confirm it in the chat box. Yes, I'm audible. Audible. Okay. So I'm audible. So is there any disturbance from my side? I think no, right? No. Okay. Thank you for responding. So this is the React application. So we are able to see when we're going to mouse over, the information getting changed. So we used Hanuman working as a full stack developer and Rajesh working as a one developer. When we are going to mouse up, the initial value will be stored. So this is how we're going to work with the state concept in React. And for better understanding, let me use another example. So I would like to remove all the stuff here. So whatever the information available in the state, I'm going to remove it. And I'm going to remove this initial value and the change state values also. So we have on mouse over function. So it's better to remove all the stuff, whatever it may be. We have to remove all the stuff here. So for better understanding, I'm going to use a new example, another example. So first of all, this is also I'm going to remove, and similarly, so I'm going to initialize the value, but by using the counter. So that is counter, and I'm going to initialize this with 0. So I just used counter, that is 0, and here I'm going to access it in between these h2 elements. So that is this dot state dot count. So I think it's count or counter. Yes, counter. It's counter. So I just used this dot state dot counter. So let me save this and execute. Yes, we are able to see the 0 as the result here, output. And I'm going to use a button, and I'm going to use increment as the text for this button. So let me open the output. So now we are able to see the increment button. So when we are going to click on this button, so the counter value will be incremented. That is the scenario here we have to use. So increment, and when we are going to click on this increment, we have to increment this value by 1. So here what we have to do, we have to call the state value first. So I'm going to use onClick event. So there is onClick event, and I'm going to use change or increment counter. It's better to use increment counter. Increment counter. So if you observe this is a function, right? So this is a function. So we have to use this keyword for accessing the current object. So this dot increment. So increment. Yes. This dot increment counter. So we have to use this callback for incrementing the value of the state. So I'm going to represent a function that is increment counter. Increment counter, and this is a function, so we have to use arrow symbol. All right. So in this we have to use the set state method. So I'm going to use set state method. Set state, and so we have to use an object like string, right? So what is the data available here? So that is counter. I just used counter, and I'm going to use this dot state dot counter, and we have to increment it by 1, right? So that is the reason I used this dot state dot counter plus 1. And whenever we are going to click on the button, that value will be incremented. So that is the reason we used a set state method here for manipulating the data available in the state. So whenever we are going to click on this button, so this function will be called, that is increment counter. So in that increment counter, we just used this dot set state method, and we incremented the counter value by using this dot state dot counter plus 1. So save this and execute in the browser. So let me click on this increment. Now we were able to see that. We are able to observe the value gets incremented when we are going to click on the increment button. So we didn't do anything. We just used a button. And we used this dot increment counter. This dot increment counter. That's it. We didn't do any kind of things. So we just used a callback. So that is increment counter. So this is the function we are going to call, and in that we implemented the state concept, that is set state method, for manipulating the value of the counter. So very similar to this, we need not to use the this is the bad scenario as we discussed earlier. So we have to use the parameter. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use the parameter. So I'm going to use a parameter. So it's better to do like this. So I'm going to use a preview state. For example, I would like to remove all the stuff here. So we already know the set state method is a function. This is the predefined function, and I'm going to use prev state here. Prev state, and I'm going to use the arrow symbol. So prev state is a parameter, right? Prev state is a parameter, and so here I'm going to use prev state dot name. So that is not name, right? So I'm going to use counter. Just use counter, and that is prev state dot counter plus 1. That's it. So that is an increment operator. So we just used a counter. So we are getting an error, that is expected an assignment or function call instead of cyan expression. Oh, all right. So this has happened because so we already represented this data in this brace. So again we are using the brace. Remember everyone, when we are going to use the narrow function that returns a value directly, but here we are using another arrow function. So this is also returning a value. So it is not suggested for us. So instead of this brace, we have to use parenthesis. I'm going to use parenthesis when we are going to work with multi-binding statement. And just save this. Again we are getting error, that is prev state dot counter plus 1. So what is that error here? So set state, and we used prev state dot counter plus 1. So here we are able to get an error, that is the counter is okay, and we used the set state method. Increment counter, that's also fine. This is not set state, and we are passing a prev state. Is there any error again? No. So here we used prev state, that's fine. Prev state, and this is the counter, counter, counter. Yes, this is an object, right? So this is an object. We use like a syntax like this. So we just used counter, that is prev state, and we used prev state dot counter plus 1. Save this and execute in the browser. So refresh. Okay, let me click on increment. Now we are able to see that answer. So because previously we used the function directly, so this is an object-like style. That is the reason we have to use the object. So we have to use a prev state mechanism like this. So that means prev state, and we used counter and prev state at counter plus 1 for incrementing the value of it. Now we are able to see that here. So this is all about how we are going to increment the value of a state. Sir, once check. So double parenthesis. We have to use double parenthesis. Amarnath. Yes, sir. Once check parenthesis. Where is that? Everything is fine, right? So we're able to see that here. Everything is fine. So this is the coding part, and it's better implement the documentation. Set state and using prev state. So this is using prev state for manipulating the data. Manipulating the data of a state. So I'm going to use the functionality, function module here. JavaScript, and here I'm going to use the function module along with the prev state. So we have to use the previous state mechanism like this. Previous state is nothing but previous state. We can use any kind of customized value instead of previous state. I'm using the previous state, that is. So you can use any kind of customized name instead of previous state. You can use your name for representing this. It is not a problem. So this is customized, not a predefined. This is customized, user defined. Is it clear, everyone? An increment counter. Yes, yes. Yes, it's clear. Is that clear, everyone? Kindly respond in the chat box. It's clear. So, yes. Anil Yadav, it's clear. And yes, Swarna, clear. So, Durga Vasu is absent for today, right? Durga Vasu is absent, and Fatima clear, and Anand is also clear. Okay. Now this is how we are going to implement the increment operation for a state. And now what we have to do, you have to do the decrement operation. So just do the decrement operation and respond in the chat box if you complete it. GitHub link once. Okay, definitely I will share the GitHub link once. So first of all, let me come with the changes. Yes. So this is the documentation. You can find it. So you have to do the decrement operation. Yes. So I will give you 2 minutes of time to complete the task. So we already gave a task that, yes, we already implemented the increment operation. What you need to do is you have to implement the decrement operation. You have to create a button, and when we are going to click on that button, you have to decrement the value of the state. Just respond how many of you completed the task. How many of you completed the task? So Okay, so let me execute the decrement operation. So let me open the Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to create a button, and that is decrement. So I'm going to use on-click function. On-click, and we have to implement the decrement operation. So I'm going to use this dot. So decrement counter. So we need to use this function. I have to create the function here. So that is decrement counter. Decrement, and this is a function, right? So we have to use parenthesis and arrow, and in between this we have to implement that. So this dot set state, and we use prev state, and so this is an object like state, right? So what we have to do, we have to use object like this counter, and we have to use prev state dot counter -1. So save this and execute in the browser. So we have two buttons now. One is for increment and second one is for decrement. So when we're going to click on increment, now the value gets incremented by 1. When we're going to click on decrement, the value gets decremented. And it's time to apply the condition. So when we are going to decrement, when the value is 0, then it's getting a minus. So we have to stop it at 0. So when we're going to have 0, then we have to stop it without getting any kind of negative values when we are going to click on the decrement button. So I'm going to use a condition here. So if, and let me use not. So if, what is that? So dot state dot counter so we have to use greater than or equals to 0. No, greater than 0. Then we have to do the increment operation, the decrement operation. So condition, and we have to close it here. That's it. And let me check it out. So refresh, and I'm going to click on decrement. Now we are not able to see that. So let me click on increment. Now we can see that. So this is how we're going to stop it out at a specific point. So we just used a condition. Right. So this is all about the set state method, how we are going to use state and how we are going to use set state method. So this is for decrement operation. So decrement operation, let me paste the code here. So decrementing the value, here. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to paste the code here. So this is for decrementing the value of the state. So let me commit the changes, and this is all about the documentation. So states in React and manipulating the data in state and using prev state, and this is how we're going to use decrement functionality. Is that clear, everyone? Is that clear, the concept of state and set state? Kindly respond in the chat box. If you are having any kind of queries or doubts, you can ask me. If you are having any kind of doubts, you can ask me. So everybody is responded that it's clear, but whenever I'm going to give a task, nobody completed it. I suggested you to complete the task, that is decrement operation for the state, but nobody completed it, right? But most of the people responded it's clear. So here what we used is state for the class component, and we used constructor as well as the super method. These are the mandatory. Without these, we can't implement the state mechanism. So we used this dot state and we used a counter that equals to 0, and we used two functions here. First one is increment counter and second one is decrement counter. So here we are calling the functionalities. So the callbacks. So we used this dot increment counter and we used this dot decrement counter. When we are going to click on this button, the first button, the value gets incremented. When we are going to click on this decrement button, the value gets decremented. This is the difference of these two buttons. Alright, so we discussed that. So when we are going to implement the state concept, we should use the class components, right? But how we are going to implement the class features, the functionalities from the class in the function component is very difficult. Because when we are going to use a state mechanism, so we have to get information from the base class. That is the reason we need to use constructor as well as the super keyword, a super method. But how we are going to implement the state concept in the functional component? That is also one of the important aspects, isn't it? So for that, we have another concept. So if you want to implement not only this state concept, we have different kinds of features in class components. If you want to implement these features in your functional component, we have to use a concept that is hooks. So I'm going to remove the class component here. So yes, I removed entire data from app.js. From here, I'm going to build the new data by creating a functional component. So I'm going to use a function. So we know how to create a function. So we have to use function keyword and app. So, and we have to use a return statement here. So return, and in that we have to represent the data. So let me use a sample information, that is h2. So this is sample heading, right? So I'm going to use the content like this is a sample head. So we are getting error. So hello is not defined. So where we used hello. So yes. This is, we don't have any kind of hello, right? So we have the app function. So we have to use app function only. App. And very similar to this. So we need not to use any kind of header. So there is no need by using this header. Similarly, we need not to use any kind of component here. So this is just enough. Import React from React. That's enough. Now let me save this and execute. Refresh. Now we are able to see that this is a sample heading. This is a sample heading. Okay. And it's time to implement the state concept here. So I'm going to use the hooks concept. So we have one hook for implementing the state concept in functional component, that is uState. I'm going to use uState here. I just used uState. All right. And here we have to implement that use state concept. So I'm going to use the destructuring. So remember everyone, when we are going to use state mechanism, we have to use destructuring. So we have to represent two values. The first one is for implementation and second one is for manipulation. So I'm going to use data. This is the first one, and I'm going to use set data. This is for manipulating the data. So this data is for initialization and the set data is for manipulation. And I'm going to use state. Use state. And here I'm going to use name, and again I'm going to use Hanuman and comma. The second one is role, and the role is full stack developer. So we used data and set data. So data and set data. Data is the initialization and set data is for manipulation. So I'm going to display the data from here. So I'm going to use data here. Data. And just save this and execute. So this is an object, right? So let me refresh. We're able to see some kind of errors again. So React child found object with keys name role. If you mean to render a collection of children, use an array instead. Oh, okay. So we have to use an array. That's what we need to implement it. So first of all, we used name Hanuman. So I'm going to use data dot name first. If we save this and execute, now we're able to see Hanuman. Similarly, I'm going to use is working as I'm going to use data dot row. So data dot row. So we just used like this. So data dot row. So Hanuman is working as full stack developer. So Hanuman is working as a full stack developer. So this is how we are going to represent the use state hook. So use state is very similar to the normal state in class component. We have to use state for implementing the state concept. So is that clear everyone? How we are going to use state mechanism? Is that clear everyone? Yes, clear. Yes, clear. So what I did, how to change, yes. Mahesh responded that how to change the data. So that's what we have to do now. So I think it's clear up to now how we're going to, yes. Anli Yadav asked me to repeat that again. So we used use state. So use state is one of the hook concept in React. So by using a hook, we can implement the features of a class component. Similarly, here when we are going to use a hook, we have to use destructuring. So I just used const data and set data. So this first parameter is for initializing the values, and this is for manipulating the information. So if you observe this here, this is the value of data. So we have only one value, that is object, that is available in data, and we have set data function. Set data is nothing but we can manipulate the information. So this is an object, right? So we have to, if you want to display that information, we have to use the keys here. So that is the reason I used data.name and data.row. So we already discussed how we are going to how we're going to use the data as well as the keys here. So data, and if you want to call that information from the object, we have to keys. So that is the reason I used name as and the role. Is that for everyone? So we just used that destructuring mechanism for implementing the who concept. We just used const data and set data function. It's clear. Okay, now Mahesh already asked that. So how we are going to change the values of it? So yes, I'm going to use the on click again, or on change. I'm going to use on change, or not on change. So on mouse over. On mouse over. So I'm going to call a function. So remember, so we should not use any kind of this keyword because this is not a class component. This is a plain functional component. So I'm going to use change data. So I just used change data, and whenever we are going to click on this, our mouse hovering, the history attribute, we have to call back to this change data function. So let me implement the change data function. So change data, and remember it's very important. So we have to use the var keyword. So in in class component we directly use a function, but when we are going to implement it in functional component, so we have to use var keyword or the functional keyword. So that is change data. So we just used change data. So that is equals to sim. Okay. So let me use an alert here. First of all, for checking, I'm going to use an alert. That is hello. So let me save this. So change data is not defined. Oh yes. So we have to represent that in a function. So let me use this. Yes, change data D is capital. D is capital. We can save this and execute. Hello. Yes, we are able to see that. When we are going to mouse over, we are able to see the alert. So now we have to change the value. So what we have to do, so we have to call the function that is set data. So set data, and set data is a function. Actually, we should not use a function and another function again. Set data, that's fine. And here what we have to do, so data.name, and that is, so what we have to do, we have to change that data.name equals to, I'm going to use Rajesh. So we have to use a binding statement here. So yes, we are not able to get that information. So change data. That's fine. So change data, and data is not passing here. So data.name, that's fine. So without using this function, I'm going to implement it first. So because we already created a function, again we are using the change data here. So I'm going to use the change data function here. Change data, not change data. This is a set data function. Set data, and So we have to use data dot name. So, and what we have to do, we have to change it. First of all, we have to use the parameter here. So what we have to do, so we use equal to symbol because this is not an object, right? So data dot name equals to, I'm going to use Rajesh, and that's fine. So let me save this. So refresh. Data is not getting changed. Okay, so let me use parentheses because we need to use a function, right? So it is set data. Set data is the function, and so set data. So we have to represent it like this, right? So this is a function. And set data, we have to use data dot name. So we have to change this. Set data, and it's better to use the name of it. Okay, so let me call this by using data.name only. So data.name name equals to I'm going to use Hanuman. So what's happening here? So expected, yes. So we forgot to close. So unexpected use of name here. So that is the error. So name is an object. So let me use the braces. So this is Hanuman, and yes, we already working out, but we used name as Hanuman and Rajesh, and the second parameter is role, right? So I'm going to use role. So that is modern developer. Save this and execute in the browser. So Rajesh is man developer. Let me refresh. Hanuman is working as now. It's fine. Now it's working fine because this is an object-like syntax, right? So that is the reason we have to use object in the parameters. So very similar to this, when we are going to use mouse out. So I'm going to use mouse out function. So on mouse out function is even on mouse out. So here I'm going to use the braces again. So here I'm going to call the function. So that is initial data. I just used initial data. This is a function. So now it's time to represent this data. So we have to use initial data that equals to, so we have to create a function. Alright, so in this we have to implement that. So that is set data, and this is a function. So we have to use the object here because we used the object for initialization. The first one is name, and we have to use Hanuman, and the second one is role, that is full stack. Alright, so save this. So initial data is not defined, so INITIAL, initial data. Okay, so we have to use where keyword, right? Where initial data equals to, right? So let me use that. So just refresh, and again, yes, we're able to. You were able to see the change when we're going to mouse over and mouse out. So this is all about how we're going to use the state concept in the functional components. So we used the hooks concept here. So please show colorful data. Yes, okay. So this is all about today, and I hope it a little bit confusing. So we will repeat the same procedure again tomorrow. So for better understanding, I would like to share the document data. So this is all the data. I'm going to paste it. So this is the documentation. So let me click on edit, and this is the hooks concept, how we are going to implement it. So using hooks concept for implementing state functionality in functional component. Alright, so JavaScript, and now we have to paste this information. It's completed now. So if you are having any kind of doubts, you can ask me. So I would like to paste the documentation here. So you have to do one thing for tomorrow. So just do one task. You have to implement the increment and decrement operations by using hooks concept. Alright, so let me wind up the session for today because the time is already 6:35. So thank you everyone. So we will discuss the same concept again tomorrow for recap. Thank you.